Hello and welcome to the Next Chapter with Nikon Australia. My name is Julie Kimpton and I'm the Senior Professional Markets Manager at Nikon Australia. Today's guest, Nick Moir, is a very talented photographer. Nick started his career as a copy boy at the Herald in 1993. He knew immediately that he wanted to be a photographer, and so he took a job as a photographer's assistant. The first frame he took at the Sydney Morning Herald was of a tiger biting another tiger's head, and that was the start of his photographic career. Press photographers are a special type of photographer, but Nick Moir takes it to the next level. The environment he works in and the content he captures is as wild as his hair. He has a passion for capturing dramatic environmental phenomena, from lighting and dust storms to bushfires and the devastating effects of climate change. He's won numerous awards, including World Press and Walkleys, and he's the founding member of Oculi. He's a dad of 4 kids, and he's currently the chief photographer at the Sydney Morning Herald. Today, he will be sharing his imagery and experience shooting Black Summer. Please welcome Nick Moir.
Well, hello. Yes, so what I'll be going through over the next period of time is showing you essentially what started about this time last year with covering a fire up near Port Macquarie in sort of halfway up the coast of New South Wales and all the way through to January. Now, essentially I was on day after day after day of fires, and it was a long and arduous journey, and seeing a lot of incredible events, a lot of amazing conditions. So yeah, look, let's start off and let's see where we go. So I'm going to be showing you a set of images edited down from about October through to January last year and early this year. I covered most of the major fires in New South Wales, starting off with the image that you're seeing on the screen at the moment, which was the Crestwood Fire up near Port Macquarie. And this was the one that started to get some of the attention of people overseas because of the death toll of the koalas in the region. There was a fairly large koala colony there that the fire swept straight through. Fires had been already going for at least about a month at least, with the Drake fire up near Tenterfield particularly bad. But this first fire, what it shows is one of the New South Wales Rural Fire Service's new jets that they had brought in for this season, and they at times could be quite useful. The reason why the RFS guys there are taking photos was because at that stage the fire wasn't threatening properties. They were there just to keep an eye on it while the aerial tankers attacked the fire. Also, like the jet, the use of jets is actually a fairly recent phenomenon in Australia, and this jet in particular was brand new this season. So moving on. There was a number of fires along the New South Wales coast, and what was particularly bad about this season was the drought setup all the way down from the Queensland border into Victoria, and very close to the coast. So we had areas that were essentially getting as much rainfall as some of the central deserts of Australia, but with huge forests as well. So the setup was there for a very nasty sort of fire. So this fire is one that was, I was trying to give the idea of like this is dairy farm sort of country, and the fire's tearing through it. All right, we'll move on. So for me, the real sort of action began in November last year when I was covering the Hillville fire, which is near Taree. So that's about an hour's drive north of Newcastle. Anyway, this fire had been threatening a number of the communities and had already destroyed a number of homes. Essentially, whenever any sort of winds got up and got moving, the fire would move. It was very problematic. So normally in southeastern Australia, it's your westerlies and northwesterly winds that really cause the damage. But this time there was so little humidity and the fuel loads were so high and also so dry that any sort of wind got that fire moving. This day was the 12th, and in an area called Failford, and the fire essentially once again jumped over the Pacific Highway and raced into a community. It was, rushing through backyards. At that stage, there were fire brigades from all across the country in New South Wales already, because the RFS had been fighting already for close to a couple of months. This region was being guarded by some firefighters from the ACT, which must have been quite difficult because they were totally unused to the region. They didn't know where any of the homes were, so it was very much a scramble going from house to house to see if there were fires in the area, and just trying to it's like just constantly chasing a tail. Fires were jumping up all over the place.
Nick, how do you keep yourself safe in an environment like this when it's constantly changing and you don't know what's happening from one second to another?
Well, the main one is, there's lots of stuff. Preparation and experience, but preparation as in you've got your fire kit, as in you've got a helmet, fire retardant jacket and pants. You'll have strong boots, a lot of water. You have to do training before you are allowed to go into a fire ground in New South Wales, and I believe it's the same in Victoria. But then when on the days, when you arrive at where a fire is going to sort of impact on a community, like you'll first of all find a place for you to safely park, so not underneath a tree, not where you're blocking roads, but you want to be on an area where it's not going to burn. So even a grass fire, if it gets underneath your car, it's going to burn your car. So it's actually a bit tricky even just finding that. There's many things like keeping an eye if you're on a one-way road. If the fire cuts you off, what do you do then? And look, that happens a lot. So a lot of the time it's just about staying calm and finding a safety zone. And usually when you're around communities, there usually is a safety zone, whether that's amongst a whole pile of fire trucks, like happened to me up in Bilpin later on in the season. But I guess one of the main ones is preparation and staying calm once it occurs. Like many situations like this, it's once you panic and start making bad decisions that things tend to go wrong.
Are you travelling on your own or are you travelling in a group? And do you travel with the fire services?
I will be last season I was in my own sort of Land Rover Defender by myself most of the time. Sometimes I might have a journalist with me. It's very much on the very big days, I will often have a journalist with me, which can make it a bit tricky at times because you're also then responsible for their lives as well. So it can be a little bit tricky at times. Sometimes I'll meet up with other photographers. Now, you can't get into the RFS's trucks, but sometimes I'll be following their vehicles with their knowledge, and 99% of the time they're quite happy for you to be there. There can be times when it's not like that, but yeah, usually it's just it's sort of like you turn up and then it's just helter-skelter for a couple of hours and then it calms down in the evening, usually. But this season was very different. So it tended to be full on 24 hours a day for weeks on end.
In this image here, Nick, it looks like you are very close to the fire. Are you shooting this with a wide-angle lens or are you standing back and shooting with a telephoto lens? And how much consideration do you give to the choice of equipment when you're shooting a bushfire?
I will rarely use a long lens. I will usually use a wide-angle lens. It's possible to get safely up to a fire. This one in particular, it's just essentially a quiet grass fire. The fire had a fire doesn't actually have to be raging to burn a house down. It just, like this one, it just was unattended, and it just wandered up. The firefighters didn't even know it was there, and it just wandered up and set fire to the house. And I happened to see it while I was patrolling around. But that's just grass fire. Just it's not moving fast. So, look, gear is in particular like I think you'll find this a lot of the time with photojournalists. They will prefer to use a wide-angle lens. I don't like using anything too wide. My favourite lens is a 24 to 70. But it gives, I think it, you want to be able to have nice composition. I find the super wide-angle lenses ruin that composition a lot of the time. But I like being able to get up and close, in particular for fires, to actually get some of the really amazing behaviour. You do need to be close and to really show the firefighters desperation and sometimes the panic and just the extreme conditions. It just can't be with a long lens. Often you'll be shrouded in smoke, so nobody can look in. It's like getting into a cupboard with a bear. So it can be a bit nerve-wracking at times, but yeah, wide angle is the way to go. So the next frame I'm showing you is probably, along with that boat, the boat on fire, this was the first really impactful action sequence that I got. So this was on the 13th of November. Once again, the Hillville fire. A small local brigade from Kundalmoto were trying to get hold of a number of spot fires that were racing westwards, which is quite unusual. Usually, once again, the winds are from the west, or in Victoria tend to be north or northwest, but there usually is some sort of westerly element to the fire, to the winds. This time, just the incredible dryness of the fuel meant that the sea breezes, which are very constant, even on the quieter days along the New South Wales coast, meant that fires were just continuing to spot and move. What's going on here is there had been a spot and a grass fire was racing towards a farmhouse. This brigade had raced up. They're struggling to get all their hoses out and defend it. And then we go on to the next photo. Essentially, the fire overwhelmed us. We all just had to sort of duck down and get behind the truck. So it was what was called like a low-end burnover event, where essentially the flames sweep past you. It can be, pretty full on. It was even with respirators and stuff, it was very difficult to breathe. The grass smoke in particular is quite choking. Not toxic or anything, but it will really, bring you down. And the conditions, once again, are very difficult. So you've got all this gear on, it's 35 degrees, and you're suddenly going through some very intense firefighting conditions.
You can't even see here, Nick. Nick, you can't even see here. How do you know where you're going or what to shoot at, and how do you stay safe?
No, that's like a meter ahead of me as well. It's and I've worked on that just to bring in some contrast. Yeah, so essentially it really is, when I talk about the non-panic thing, it's like, okay, when we got there, the truck had parked on a non-burning area, and getting behind that truck and just staying calm, you will be okay, but it's just going to be intense for a while. So the fire swept through and there were flames around, but we're all got our gear on, and it's just, you sort of hunker down for a bit, and after about 10 seconds, they get back out and they save the farmhouse. So it's just a lot of the time that goes on for hours after hours. It's just very intense. it takes some bravery, and it's one of the reasons why I actually have a huge admiration for the RFS and CFA as an organisation, because a lot of these people, like, they are literally just the people that you see around each day, and yet they voluntarily throw themselves into like some really desperate situations. And this day was the first of a number of pretty desperate battles that I was witness to.
So can you explain to us how you work with the fire services?
So it starts off with before each season, the RFS or CFA, they will do some media training, and they will go through, how to safely interact with fire brigades out on a fire ground. But for myself, I started doing fires before there was even fire training. So I actually went and trained as a volunteer firefighter, so I'd understand what is required on the ground. And I found that that's been a huge gain for me. Like, I will see brigades out all the time, particularly this season, who recognise me and know that they don't have to watch me. And but even then, if it's a new brigade, they haven't seen me before or met me before, they usually can quickly see by my behaviour and how I conduct myself on the fire ground that they don't need to worry about me. So it's quite tricky, but it's kind of a bit like a war zone. You kind of will stick out pretty quickly if you're doing silly stuff.
So Nick, when you're shooting in a bushfire environment, I think you said you were shooting sometimes 24 hours a day for weeks on end. Tell me about batteries. Is that a consideration for you? Is it easy to get to power, or what do you do there?
Well, as you would have seen from what was left of the 24-70 that I sent into you guys, gear does suffer and suffers badly, especially if you have to change lens in a situation like the frame before. It gets cooked, the rubber will melt off, dust is everywhere, and smoke, and just it's amazing that the cameras can actually operate in that. Myself, I tend to, I'll have my vehicle and I'll keep it as close as I possibly can to where I will be in case I do need to get out quickly. I will have a lot of water and food because you will go through litres and litres in an hour if it's really intense. Particularly on some of those big days, the temperature was above 45 degrees. So that was pretty full on. I guess the standard sort of kit for photographers would be a couple of that time it was D5s or similar, and a 24-70 and a 70-200. I tend to go one camera. I like to be quite light. I'll have the other camera in my car if I need it, but I want to be as light as possible in case I really need to make a move. And it just makes me a little bit more movable. Now, what was interesting was a photographer from the US who works for AP, does a lot of fires over in the US. He came and joined me for a day. I invited him along, and he shoots all his stuff. His name's Noah Berger. He picked up a World Press this year as well. He shoots his stuff on the Z6s, the mirrorlesses. So he's very confident, certainly, in their robustness, which is what I guess press photographers would be a little bit at first hesitant in when they've got your D6s, which are big titanium solid body, whether or not something a smaller, lighter mirrorless can handle the situations. However, he was quite happy to run around with it. So that was quite interesting. So certainly, if you intend to be doing running around in like a hot, difficult situation, light gear is the way to go. I will, while I might have a laptop in the car, I will send on a smartphone directly. either using cable or like new cameras are all Wi-Fi. That's massive advantage to be able to just smoothly get those images out really quickly.
So, Nick, what about batteries? When you're shooting, I think you said 24 hours a day for days or weeks on end, a battery is a consideration in an environment like a bushfire.
Oh, it's I mean, like you would have rests. So that's the advantage with the big D6s and stuff like that. The battery life is pretty incredible. So you'll have a number of batteries sort of ready to go, but the car, like you'll have a power inverter and be charging the batteries when you need to. Um, that's that's kind of something that we're always doing anyway. I mean, I'll always have a couple of batteries just charging, ready to go when I need them. But generally, batteries didn't tend to be a problem. I mean, that is the big advantage with the big strong D6s and D5s. Just the battery life is amazing. Like sometimes you just don't need to change batteries for a week.
Yeah.
While these jobs might be going on for like 24 hours a day, and like the working day maybe 17, 18 hours, most of that isn't actually spent photographing. It's usually trying to work out where the fire is moving, where your safety zones are, like speaking to contacts and even just trying to negotiate your way into an area. While officially we're allowed to be on the fire zones, it can be quite difficult at times to get past um, some of the police roadblocks and stuff.
So, Nick, it seems that the fire services are quite happy to have you around, but the police perhaps not so. What's your experience?
Yeah, I mean, on those really big days in particular, it can be very stressful, and the police's job is to keep people out of harm. And the message that their media are allowed into these fire zones is sometimes forgotten, or they just rather not have to worry about us in those positions. And certainly, I can see the point. While there are some media that are as experienced as myself, there's a lot that aren't, and definitely there are times when media can definitely get themselves into trouble quite easily. So it's usually just a bit of negotiation. It's rare that it ever gets ridiculous or anything like that.
Oh, look, it's just incredible imagery. And I would have almost thought it's safer for you to travel with a group of photographers, someone looking to the front, another person at the back or the side, working as a team to help yourselves be safe.
We do that at times. While I might be by myself in my car, this season in particular, I worked often with Dean Saul, Matt Abbott, Jeremy Piper, all very old friends who have covered a lot of fires together. And knowing that having somebody who's watching your back, who's got experience, um, is great. But the issue this year was there was just so many fires that there just wasn't. It was not often that we would all be in one place. In particular, like on the 21st of December, when there was the Greenwater Creek fire and the Gospers Mountain and the big backburn that was to try and prevent the Gospers Mountain, they all were going ballistic, including the Currawan fire as well. So you just had so many emergency warnings, and there's only so many photographers. So it tended to be, we were often working by ourselves. But certainly we've got the experience to judge when it is safe or it isn't safe. There were a couple of tight situations. Jeremy Piper and I had a interesting one when fire cut him off from the rest of us up in Bilpin, and there are a lot of days when you get isolated. While it's good to be together, it's also nice to get some good shots with nobody else around as well.
So I guess there's that saying again, just keep calm and carry on.
Yeah, I mean, it's the secret to a lot of stuff is making controlled decisions. But the trick with that is you have to you really do need to just have on the ground experience to be able to look and see what's going around you and put some of that that advice to use. It can be if you're not used to how fast fires can move or what's going on, something can seem quite boring and then can rapidly develop, or if you don't know what you're actually looking at. So yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I learned a lot of lessons all over again, or brand new lessons this year. Certainly in fire behaviour. I mean, that's the thing about photography is while press photographers we have to be generalists and be able to do everything. When it comes to stuff like fires and storms and stuff like that, to get consistently good imagery, you also have to be a specialist in that area. So there'll be plenty of people who they might, like for example, Kate Geraghty specialises in police politics and disaster and combat sort of situations, and yet day to day she'll be doing stuff around politics around Sydney as well. So it's tricky. It's tricky. You've got to take a lot of learn a lot of lessons that it really is only experience that will teach you.
So, Nick, what have we learnt about fire over the last couple of decades, but in particular last season?
Well, for myself, it was just seeing how fast some of these fires would move under really quite mediocre conditions. Like there were days where they were rated severe, but you wouldn't necessarily be too worried about a fire in those conditions. But the fuel loads were so dry that the fires were just racing along. They were exploding so fast. It was that was what was really surprising, and it was like from the very first fire I went to this season through to the very last one. Every single time, the viciousness of the fires was what really took me aback. It was pretty incredible to watch. But then there's other sort of lessons that you relearn and relearn. For example, just turning up and sharing an experience, having a photographer at your house when a fire moves through and it might destroy your home could be pretty stressful for some people. I mean, the event is stressful, but some people do not like having a photographer there. Others are quite thankful and do understand why you're there, and the advantages of actually the attention that your community will get by sharing it out to the wider Australian community. But apart from those early ones, it's also the historical stuff that, like in 5, 10, 100 years, the actual memories of will disappear. However, like words and statistics don't tell the story of how violent these were. So it requires the photographers and videographers to get right up close in these situations. And that's the aim, is really to show what the firefighters, what the homeowners, what the national parks, what people went through. And it is a emotional and a violent and traumatic event to a community and a country when something like this happens. And it's our job, and you have to remain calm, not only as the fire's moving through, but also because people will be can at times be quite stressed, angry. They can even get violent. You kind of just got to cop it and try and talk people down and explain and move on if that's required. Myself, I try to just stay out of people's way until it really matters, and then I'll go in. So, for example, bilpin was a problem for a week. So I was up there for quite a few days. But I would really resist to be going down tracks and making a pest of myself until it mattered, and then I just get in and do my job and try to do no harm. Just try to record it and be aware of what people are going through at the time.
Is there any ethical or moral dilemmas that you face when you're covering these sorts of events?
Oh, look, it's often where there might not be, particularly, sometimes it's not really a picture to be there, but I'll give you a good example that wasn't myself, but was Jeremy Piper and Matt Abbott. During the Hillville fire, the early days of the Hillville fire, they came through an area where there was about 20 properties where there were no fire brigade and no residents, yet spot fires were coming through the area. And so they went through, it was Jeremy Piper and Dean Sewell, and they were put out a whole pile of these spot fires themselves. There weren't really pictures to be got at the time anyway. So, there's lots of little things like that. Sometimes you might help people moving, getting stuff out of the house. Sometimes it might be, putting out spot fires. I'm often just doing that. There's not you're not missing anything. It's like it's not like you're making a choice of one or the other. Sometimes stuff like that will happen, and that is difficult. But usually when it's like that, it's getting a photo and getting the hell out of there anyway. There was, a good example, I guess, was at Bilpin. The fire was sweeping through. I was with 3 fire and rescue trucks. Everybody had pulled out of the homes, and we'd gone back to our final sort of defence point, which was actually on the Bells Line of Road. We were just defending the trucks, and I was photographing that. And then somebody coming through this thick choking smoke ran into a firefighter on the road and hit him with his ute. At the time, I just heard this bang and looked up, and there was a person sort of wandering. They almost fell into the fire. So first instinct is photographing it, and then they started to bring him back. A couple of firefighters started to bring him back, but the problem there was suddenly you had 2 firefighters not stopping the fire coming towards us. So I went over and grabbed him. At the time, we were pretty worried he had a broken hip or something like that, and helped him to get into the fire truck and get out of the way, so that an ambulance, he had to be brought out to the ambulance because it was too dangerous. But, that was kind of a situation where, you could photograph, get in his face and bang, bang away, but you're already getting so many amazing pictures. It's like, you're not going to make too many friends doing that. That's kind of a personal. There'll be other photographers who may well have shot that, but at the time, it was more about, for me, I'd sort of captured him being brought back over anyway, so it was just a very in the moment sort of decision. It was kind of instinctual. That's not to say I would question anybody's morals or ethics if they chose to photograph that. That was just what I did. One of the big problems last season, particularly upper on the mid-north coast, was despite the fact that they were right next to the ocean, there was no water. So this local brigade, had to watch the shed on the left burn to the ground because there was no water. They're trying to pull water out of the tank. There was nothing in it. The dams are empty. It was, as soon as you get away from any sort of mains, they were without water. So very, very difficult firefighting. In that situation, once the house is on fire, it's too late. You can't stop it. And if the fire is doing anything more than half a metre high, you can't stop it because all they've got is a rake. So it's all about making control lines. So very, very, very difficult firefighting. So it was around about, it was around about now actually, that the Gospers Mountain fire really started to get moving. It had been lit in October, I believe. And this image shows the first day that it really made a move. I think that was on the 12th. And it was racing towards Kohler Heights at the time. So I happened to be, I wanted to go and see what it was doing. I'd been keeping an eye on that fire because any fire in that position in the western Wallamai, any sort of westerly winds means that it'll just keep moving. It's got huge amounts of fuel to move through, and the terrain is essentially inaccessible except for maybe small units of helicopter firefighters. So these are the Paddy Brigade. So Paddy is a little township in the Southern Hunter, and this sort of Singleton area. They're just looking southwest out at the fire as it makes its first sort of moves. Now, an earlier question you were asking, was there stuff there I hadn't seen before? Actually, this was something that I've been trying to photograph for a long time, which is Pyro Cumulonimbus. So the Pyro Cumulonimbus is a thunderstorm that's developed by the heat column from a bushfire. And one of the real problematic things from that is lightning that's knocked out the front of the fire. So this was at Kohler Heights, and is lightning coming down from the smoke, from the thunderstorm developed by the smoke. And while there is rain and stuff, it's this lightning generates new fires ahead of the actual storm at the fire itself. And that ended up being a major issue. So the RFS had done a massive backburning campaign to try and block the Gospers Mountain Fire from moving further into the Hawkesbury. So to try and defend places like East Kurrajong, Grossvale, a number of areas, Wilberforce, areas like that, that historically you're talking thousands of homes at threat if it moves into that area. Now what happened was not this pyrocumulus, but another one came up and dropped lightning literally about 2 kilometres past their backburning lines. So it started a new fire, which was called the 3 Mile Fire, which later on ended up joining back up to the Gospers Mountain Fire. But it just shows the huge amounts of backbreaking work, and it would have been millions of dollars worth of effort to try and backburn that fire, and then to have one bolt of lightning from the smoke plume of that other very fire just jump straight over. It was incredibly demoralising at the time for everybody involved who knew what they were looking at. So this next image is just the Gospers Mountain Fire on one of those nights. It wasn't particularly raging at the time. It was just on its... it had a go at Kohler Heights, but it was still just wandering south, vaguely towards the Kurrajong and Bilpin areas at the time. Now there was sort of lots of politics that goes along with this. What we've got here is New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian, the Emergency Services Minister on the left, David Elliott, and we've got the Deputy, at the time, the Deputy RFS Commissioner, Rob Rogers, explaining the situation. He's now the RFS Commissioner. Shane Fitzsimmons moved over to being, I think it was post-COVID redevelopment, and if there was going to be a major event with COVID, it was trying to get the state back up and going. So then just each day they would be told what was going on as far as the battle and issues over the next few days. This particular picture, I think, was just before was explaining the Gospers Mountain Fire and the issues with it and what might lay ahead. So we go on to, so the battle around Kohler Heights was pretty successful actually. They only lost, I think, one house up there, which was pretty incredible, as a lot of the homes are in areas where they're very isolated and not easily defended. But they did a good job. I'll just tootle through a few of them. It was very hot. Even though the flames don't look like they're that high, this is actually a slope. So when the fire is moving through, the actual heat column is not going up, it's actually coming at you. And you may see the firefighter's got his hand up to the face, because the actual radiant heat, it's pretty intense. It's pretty intense.
Nick, can I ask you a question about the previous image? It looks like you've used speedlights to illuminate your subject. There's a very clear rim light at the front of him and a secondary light source illuminating the back. Did you use speedlights to capture this image, or how did you get this beautiful lighting?
No, what's actually happening is, so you've got that black smoke in front of him, and the sun is just actually to the left of the black smoke, but behind him is a huge corrugated iron shed, which is super reflective. So it was just, at the time I was looking at it going, wow, that's, I mean, that is kind of one of the lighting moments that you're always kind of looking for. And then this guy happened to put on a real manly deputy fire captain stance just while he was watching it. So yeah, it was just one of those moments you look for.
It's a very lovely portrait. Well done.
So around about this time, when the Gospers Mountain Fire was making its way southeast and hitting Kohler Heights and threatening Bilpin and such, the Green Wattle Creek Fire, it had started a couple of weeks beforehand and was about 20 kilometres, 30 kilometres to the south of Katoomba, and it was just making its way steadily east. And because, once again, it's in an area which is extremely difficult to contain, very rugged terrain, it just got bigger and bigger. Joined up with a couple of other lightning strike fires and just made its way east. Now, I got held up for a few days at Lake Burragarang, so that's Warragamba Dam, essentially. And this day I was just hanging out at Silverdale with a deputy captain, and they were just essentially keeping an eye that there weren't spot fires jumping over the lake and heading into the towns of Silverdale and Warrombi. There's a couple of Oakdale and Natai. Essentially, it really is just that. It's a lot of just very visual sort of stuff. They'll have aircraft going up and down, and they held it there. It got stuck on the lake for quite a few days, and it looked like at one stage that it might not jump over. But then, I think it was the 5th of December, it finally did do it. And once it came out, while it had to essentially rebuild itself again, it came out very, very hard. It raced straight through towards Orangeville, which is sort of halfway between Warragamba and Oakdale. And the fire RFS and fire brigades lined up along this road here, which is north of Oakdale, and tried to prevent it, but the fire just blasted straight through them. In conditions like this, fires are unstoppable on such a small control line. I mean, that looks like it might be defendable, but you really need like almost 100 metres of like completely cleared area to really try and stop a fire in these conditions. Now, because it had been kind of, while there'd been a lot of smoke, but the fire hadn't actually threatened anybody yet, there were sort of party situations going on. So people were just hanging out and feeding RFS and stuff like that. So this was a little community down near Warrombi/Orangeville. And these guys had just sort of realised, okay, if the media are here and the fire's heading this direction, then it mustn't be that far off. So they got the impression, they just was like, is it time to go, isn't it? And it was like, yeah, it's time to go. So myself, Dean Sewell and Matt Abbott, I think at the time, we wandered our way down through a few properties, asking permission, by the landowners, and they were all very happy for us to be there. And just as the fire tore through the forest now, straight at homes, these horses were sort of moved into a paddock where they could at least get away. They were very nervous, like curious, but they were often just running around. They knew that, they knew something was wrong with the giant smoke plume coming straight at them.
Nick, have you ever faced a moral or an ethical dilemma? Or perhaps a time when you just haven't wanted to photograph something, or you wanted to put your camera down to help someone?
Well, I mean, there's plenty of occasions when if some horses or cattle have been trapped by a fence, I've gone and cut a fence to let them out. But usually the times where that occurs is where a fire is sweeping really hard through an area and nobody wants to be there. Like, it's too dangerous for anybody. No fire brigades or anybody is in those areas. It's just too violent. So I did see a lot of that, particularly around Sydney. A lot of people did have the warning to get their animals generally out of the way. Certainly there were a lot of people getting their horses out of the way. The days when it really, New Year's Eve was when a lot of animals were killed just because of the pure speed of the fires. But usually, look, if something can be done, I'll do something, or I might let somebody know that there's a horse down there. But you don't necessarily, you're there to do a job, and it is the homeowner, the owner's responsibility to be looking after them. In this case, I wasn't too worried for them because I thought that they had plenty of room to get into, and that there was actually sort of a safe area for them. There was I think a dam, and these fire and rescue guys had already spoken to the homeowner and were confident that they could defend the horses as well. Now, this, as you can see, it gets very dark. I mean, this is like 5 o'clock in the middle of summer, so usually the sun is well up and it's still hot. But when the fire is getting close, it gets very, very dark. And that's like, over the next few pictures, you'll see some examples of just the huge dynamic range. So the actual exposure range can be incredible. So you might be shooting f/22 at 400 ISO at a thousandth of a second or something in bright daylight. And then you go down to something like this where you might be, a 60th a second at 2.8 at 800 ISO or something like that. There are very rapid changes because you actually want to make sure you give that. You don't necessarily actually want to expose correctly because you want to give the impression of how dark it is. You actually want to underexpose it all. So I manually expose all my images. And there are advantages and disadvantages with that. In a few frames, I'll show you some of the advantages and explain some of the disadvantages. There's an old fella, his name was Jeffrey Gardner, just watching aircraft fly over as the fire swept towards the bush in his backyard. Now, this was a pretty big event, this next picture. So,
wow, that photo is just staggering and terrifying. Wow,
that was pretty full on. We were just in Orangeville, myself, Matt Abbott, and Dean, just wandering around the back of some properties, and the fire was.
You were out of your car at this stage.
Oh yeah, most of the time you're out of your car and doing stuff like this, yeah. But yeah. I mean, you don't spend all your time in the car. You just only use the car to get to and from something, and then you get out and interact. But yeah, so we were behind the backs of properties, just watching the sort of some mopping up efforts, and the fire was going to we thought, to slowly move towards the house. But essentially, slight wind change, and then just the flames, it literally exploded over the period of about 3 seconds. The flames went from very small to that like massive, like 50 meters, 60 up to 100 meters high in a very short amount of time. What I suspect happened is what's called an area ignition, where essentially a whole pile of the volatile gases were being held down by the plume of smoke over the top, and the slight change of wind allowed access to this already superheated sort of wood and leaves and gases. The flames are suddenly allowed to get in there, and it erupted like just incredibly. We all, and you've seen this, everyone just ran, and the firefighters ran back to their safety zone, which was near the house. The air was filled with millions of embers. Then there was one truck left. The guy in there got the truck out. As you can see on the left there, a fire tornado developed because when you've got so much intense heat, the air is being lifted so rapidly, and we're talking wind speeds like 100 to 200 kilometers an hour going straight up. The vorticity, like you're creating a massive low pressure area, and the vacuum winds are being pulled into that rapidly. And so you end up with things like fire tornadoes and just incredible fire behavior. Like we're literally 10 seconds before there was nothing. So that was an interesting night. We ran back. There was a period of time where myself and Dean couldn't find Matt Abbott, so a bit of yelling, and I was trying to file as well. So I took these shots and then just rang up the Herald news desk and just going, you don't often get to say, hold the front page, but this was one of those events. Filing in, I couldn't actually get it into that edition of the paper because it had literally only just gone, because this was about 9 p.m. But the next day they ran the photo of the fire tornado with the engine on the front page, and it was I'd not seen fire behaviour like that in a condition where there wasn't actually much wind. There was not a lot of wind, so it was literally the fuel initiated fire behaviour. It was incredible. It destroyed a shed and stuff in the backyard. So, but it didn't burn down. They saved the house.
Wow, Nick. I mean, those photos are just next level. That fire is just truly staggering and terrifying. There's just so many questions. And if you don't mind, I do have a couple. I'm curious about your autofocus. Did you have any issues with your autofocus, and how do you manage that when you're shooting a wall of flames?
The focus didn't have a problem because there was so much contrast. There was like it had no issues at all. But the issue was exposure. So literally a few seconds before, I was at about a quarter of a second at 2.8 at 2000 ISO. And then suddenly this wall of flame meant I had to zip down to ISO. I actually think I left my ISO as it is. I didn't have time to change it. I just zipped it straight up to, I think it was 5,000th of a second at f/22 or something like that. So you're getting everything sharp anyway.
Do you ever use the auto ISO function on your camera?
There are times when I will do it, when like, for example, on a court job, but times like this, you want to be careful of how much grain you're getting in your images, and depending on the shot that you're after. So I tend to just I'll tend to hang around between 800 to 2000, particularly the new cameras. This was on a D5, but certainly the more recent models, there's very little grain at even 2000 or even higher. So, but it's more just how I do stuff. You can tell by my old grey hair, I'm a bit of a fuddy-duddy. But I also just think I think you learn more about what your camera can do when you do it manually and control it manually.
There's a setting in our camera called exposure recall, where you can set the camera to take a shot at, say, a quarter of a second, like you said, at 2000 ISO at f2.8, and then by pressing a button in, it'll quickly change your shutter speed to a 5,000th of a second at 2.8 with a variable ISO. Do you ever use that function?
No, but I mean, and I certainly wouldn't say, like, certainly, you know, photographers now, I'd say, yeah, go for that sort of stuff. It's more just I've done it so long that it's instinctual. I can look at it at light, and I just know, you know, within a stop what it is. Particularly in environments like this and fires, where and so it's just like I don't even have to think about it. It just does it, and so I'm cool with it. All right, well, just continuing through the imagery. So that was the 5th of December. 6th of December was essentially seeing what would happen with that fire move into Warrombi and Orangeville. And it did make another nasty little run. See here, you can see a little firewall as myself and the journalist on the day, Laura Chung, we with a RFS crew actually ended up getting cut off on the wrong side of a one-way on a dead-end road. So we just had to let the fire pass. It was one of those moments where you just be cool. There's you just had to wait. Then we followed the RFS truck back through it, which was interesting because there were flames ripping up on the side and actually flames going across the road at a couple of points. So that was made for a few expletives, but we were pretty. I was confident. Like it can get a bit. What would you call it? I wouldn't say scary, but it gets the adrenaline going. But I knew it would be all right. It would only be bad if the car actually broke down. But also the RFS truck was keeping an eye on us as well. So there were, some sheds, I think a house or two destroyed on that day as well. This was in the area where that fire passed through us. But then we were in Orangeville and had gone down to the end of a cul-de-sac where there was a whole pile of homes that the fire was heading towards. There were a few fire units had deployed, but it was very difficult terrain to defend. The forest came right into the homes, as in around them. So if the fire came on hard, they would have to pull out. Just as the fire was coming, I heard the sound of an aircraft. It was a little twin-engine plane. It's called the Bird Dog, and essentially it lays down a smoke trail of where it wants the jet that's coming behind it to dump. And I looked up, and the smoke trail was right over our heads and low. And so I just yelled to Mick Seekers, who was the other photographer there, and our journo just went, "Get down," because the actual hit from a dump from a jet can actually be damaging and actually can knock you over. So it went right overhead, so I ignored my own advice and just shot straight up. We just got covered in this pink snot, because it's just like pink slime covers everything. But it nailed the fire. On that day, that was very, very effective. It stopped the fire. It saved those homes without a doubt. So that was an interesting situation to be essentially sneezed on by a jet. As you can see, the pink was covering everything. It was very effective. It was good. I mean, all the firefighters all just went, well, we're done. They just sat down and, they're looking after a very small section. So there were other parts of the fire that were still dangerous, but those homes were saved for that one.
Wow, it's just an incredible photo. I don't think I've actually ever seen anything quite like that. Just the timing and the fact that your location was incredible. It's just, it's a remarkable photo.
Getting sneezed on by a jet. Yeah, it was pretty cool at the time. I was like, oh, wow, this is going to happen. I haven't been that close to a drop from a jet before. So, to have it go right over the top was pretty cool. Yeah. But my D5 and I don't know if you saw the lens that came into you guys. It was covered in pink snot, and that was from that.
Yes, I think your gear has had a particularly tough life. Melted rubber on your lens rings to pink snot from a water bomber. It's just goes to show the durability of the gear, I guess.
It has, but it's been a good life. it's been used for what it was designed for. So, you know, that's I was very happy. They all stood up, no problems. I didn't have any gear go down on me the entire time, so I was happy. And that's all you can ask. Okay, so the next section of the series of the actual summer is just where I was like actually starting to get tired. The summer was getting worse and worse, and I was actually getting quite depressed. The region where the fires were impacting was where I grew up, and there was just so much on. There was literally so much on fire. I mean, everybody remember, like virtually the entire east coast of New South Wales was on fire, and there are many homes burning, lives were being lost, but for me it was the ecosystems. While Australian ecosystems in general are designed to cope with fire, not on this scale. And so there are lots of unique stuff that was in particular north east New South Wales. There were bushfire, rainforests getting destroyed. And even in the Wollamai, there are very unique little ecosystems, like, for example, the Wollamai pine, which is just in a couple of little valleys in there. There'd be other unique ecosystems that we don't even know about, and they were just getting hammered, absolutely hammered. Now, one of the things to try and defend homes and properties, the RFS will do backburning. So they set up a huge backburn that went from Kohler Heights to Bilpin. It was very successful in stopping the fire from moving east. However, it forced essentially any animals that were stuck between the Gospers Mountain fire and this backburn, which was about 20 kilometres long, they were in trouble. But anyway, then there was another backburn attempted around on the Bellsliner Road to the west of Mount Tomah. Now, it rapidly got out of control. The conditions at the time looked like it should have been able to be done safely. However, it only took a very mild change and the westerly winds to push in a little bit. And suddenly, on an unexpected day, I think it was a Sunday, the fire just tore straight at Mount Tomah and wiped out a street rapidly. It also then crossed both sides of the Bellsliner Road and got into what's called the Grace Valley, which is one of the most dangerous places to have fire in Australia, because it doesn't matter which way it goes, it's going to impact on properties. And it's inaccessible. You can't really fight it in there. So that was a huge problem. So you had the Gospers Mountain Fire, the biggest forest fire in Australian history, the sweeping down southeast towards Sydney, and already starting to impact properties. And then you suddenly had this attempted backburn get out of control. And essentially it's just an add-on to the Gospers Mountain Fire. And it was now in the worst possible place. And at the same time, you've got the Currawang Fire and the Greenbottle Fire. So huge amounts of fire. So it was taking out homes up in Mount Tomah. There was then a strange period of time when you had fire on both sides of the Bellsliner Road near Bilpin. But the winds were sometimes they were pushing east, sometimes they were pushing west. So what it allowed in the valleys was the fire to just keep moving, but it just didn't look very intense. But it did keep moving, and it moved in both directions. On the 19th, I think it was a Thursday, the fire made a run and raced towards properties. And you may remember back then that there were a lot of southerlies. You'd have hot days and southerly would move through. So essentially, on a hot day, you're going to have the winds will push your fire east, and then the southerly will push it north. So this is what was going on. This image that you see here, for me, it's quite interesting, is you see the fire behind is racing up the hill, but the fire in the front here is heading right. So what you're getting is all sorts of wind directions. You get vorticity and all sorts of very strange behaviours when you get this close to a fire. So when they talk about erratic fire behaviour, it's like this. It's like you can get caught out very, very quickly. there were spot fires landing in amongst our vehicles. At this moment, Jeremy Piper got isolated from the rest of us. It was, an intense day. This is fire and rescue as the fire crossed back over the Bells Line of Road. One of the many days where, like, the fire had all sorts of fingers and had lots of goes. It just essentially kept on stabbing Bilpin and Barrambing, the little townships up there. Okay, the big day for Sydney was the 21st. The 19th, it's when those 2 firefighters died as well, down from the Horsley Park Brigade, down on the Greenwater Creek fire down south. And that was in everybody's minds, not just the firefighters, but anybody, because the way that they were killed was one that we're all aware of, and it's random. And they're called widowmakers. They're essentially trees that just fall down in any time. I mean, even up in up near here, the Burrellow Creek campground was closed a couple of days ago because a tree that was damaged during the fires fell down into the campground. So it's that erratic. That is like such a dangerous thing, just the trees falling down. Anyway, this is the 21st. So this is Simon Tedrossi, who owns the Fruit Bowl, which is a very famous place up in Bilpin, as the fire's sweeping eastwards in his property. And on that day, continued to get closer and closer. The firefighters can only really fight it once it actually comes. They're there to defend property, not go deep into the bush and get themselves incinerated. So they're just waiting, letting it pass through. If fire doesn't threaten the actual homes, they just let it go. You actually can't fight it. So as you can see, the intensity is incredible. It doesn't matter how much water. Even a jet bombing that, it will evaporate a lot of the stuff before it even hit it. It might cool it down for a bit, but the fire would just laugh it off. We'll just move through a few more. This is all up in Bilpin, near the... so this is near the little cafe of Tutti Frutti. That it was a very difficult fight here. The fire and rescue, I was with several fire and rescue units, and they are deployed to try and defend the homes and the shop there. However, the conditions became so dangerous that this is the image where the commander, who's just behind them all, saying, "No, get out, everybody get out. This is undefendable. We're going back to our trucks and we're just going to make our final stand there." So that way everybody can see where everybody is, and like you don't have stuff. So essentially one of their problems was this house here had bush coming right up to it, but also there was trees behind it as well. So if they did need to get out at the wrong time, they're going to have stuff on fire behind them as well. So just it's a bit too dangerous. So we all pulled back, and as you can see, the intensity of the fire at this stage is full crown, maximum fire. You know, it's unsurvivable if you get caught in amongst it. So the fire swept through, embers everywhere, very dark. You know, at this stage, the house on the left that you saw before is on fire now. And they're just trying to defend the trucks and keep everybody together. Same thing here. As you can see, very dark, even though we're in the middle of not in the middle of the day, but about 5 p.m. So still about 3 hours before the sun's really going down. Now, this is the image. You can see the light on the left. That's the ute. There's a couple of other images of before this, but this is the firefighter who was hit. And these guys have helped him and started to bring over to me. At the time, like I was going, "Oh, what's it going to look like?" Their faces are covered with everything. It's not, you're not going to get an emotional picture out of his face. So instinctually, I just went and helped him and got him into the truck. Like I said before, other photographers might do something different. It was just what I did. these guys were helping defend my life as well at the time, and they were comfortable having me there. And for me, it was kind of like, well, part of the deal is you help them out as well if they need it. They were unable to save Tutti Frutti. I grew up in the region, and I was really sad to see it go. They've just reopened though, so I would encourage everybody to go up and help them out. Bilbin has had a real rough go of it, particularly that, and then COVID. Nobody going up there. There's more of it. So after that, the 21st, the Herald said, because I was kind of pretty, I wouldn't say messed up, but I was emotionally exhausted. It had been pretty full on. And they said, it's time for you to go on holidays. So I had already booked in some time with 17 of my close family, as in my mum and her partner, my dad and his partner, and sisters and nephews and nieces and my children and dogs. We thought it would be a really good idea to go to the South Coast for a holiday. So well, that didn't go down too well. Anyway, we it's actually the Shoalhaven. So they live in Currarong, which in the end was okay, but like literally only 10 k's, 15 kilometres away was that incredible footage of the fire and rescue guys as they ploughed straight through that full burn over, where all their trucks were destroyed and they had to walk out through the flames. That was close by, and so at the time I could see the sky. I could see what was going on. It was massive Pyro Cumulonimbus, apocalyptic skies. My kids and the rest of the family were kind of cool, but I was going, it's too late to leave. Like I'd already been kind of preparing the house to get ready for in case they all had to evacuate down to the beach. And there came to a point where it's beach time. It's time to go to the beach. If the fire crosses over, it's going to be here rapidly and it'll wipe out the town. Which wasn't really what they wanted to hear. But happy holidays. Anyway, at the time on New Year's Eve, so I'd been watching, as is my wont, the radar and to see what the plumes, because the radar, you can use the radar to see how thick the plumes are, and how thick the plumes are indicates how strong the fire is underneath it. And at 2:30 in the morning, I was seeing monster firestorms raging in the snowy mountains and the south coast. So because I was on holidays, I contacted James Brickwood, and he raced south very early, got down to areas around Bateman's Bay. Matt Abbott he was actually on holiday in Currarong as well. He went south and got that incredible photo of the kangaroo jumping in front of the flames that the New York Times used really well. And then anyway, essentially over the next few days, I was on holiday, got the Caroline Fire. There's one of the aircraft, one of the few examples of a long lens shot from me. This is a couple of weeks later, actually, the Caroline Fire jumped over a river and got a different name, but essentially it was the same fire, destroyed homes in Penrose, which is in the Southern Highlands. So massive fires, like unbelievable sizes. This was the same day also where that C-130, the American pilots were killed when the C-130 firebomber smashed into the ground. So that was pretty heavy news. In the background there, you can actually see your firefighter in the front, and you can see a human shape in the background. That's actually the American photographer, Noah Berger. He'd teamed up with me on that day, and he literally got off the plane. He said, "Do you want a beer?" And I said, "No, quick, get down to Mossvale." And he jumped in the car with me, and then bang, it was off and running. Now, it was around about then that the actual weather systems did change, and there was some moisture starting to come back into the system, and so it meant some storms. And so, but ahead of these storms, because it's so dry, you had huge amounts of of dust. So the first thunderstorms were picking up monster amounts of dust and pushing them east. And so I went out for a break from the fires, went out and did storm chasing, which is what I like to do. I do actually find it quite relaxing. Yeah, weird, I know. But anyway, yeah, it was pretty amazing. This was out near Orange. And then we'll move on. This was a storm. It's called a gustnado. So it's essentially some sheer inflow winds mixing with outflow winds, and essentially just the winds being twisted into not a tornado, not a willy-willy, but kind of halfway in between. And it made this, very cool sort of weather event. It's relatively rare. And then this last shot that I'm going to show is a drone photo looking straight down into Dargan, which got hit very hard up in the Blue Mountains. Looking into the dam down there. It's kind of strange looking shots because it looks like it's a reflection, kind of is, but essentially it's looking down onto a creek that's now got water in it, but both sides of the thing were incinerated. And so as the snow came in during winter, myself and actually a few photographers were looking for times where there would be snowfall in the blackened landscape, where, as you can see, there was very little recovery. And even now up there's areas where there is the trees are dead, even though they are trees like accustomed to fire. The intensity was just too much and they've been wiped out.
Yeah, it's incredible work, Nick. Thank you so much. And I mean, that image is astounding. And I'm glad that you said that it was snow, because I wasn't sure if it was snow or if it was ash. And what an incredible way to sort of finish your presentation. You start with a wall of flames and you end with snow. It's almost cruel. What a shame that the snow couldn't have come a little bit earlier and perhaps helping to put out the flames or slow it down.
Thanks, Julie.
Well, Nick, thank you so much. You've been friends with Nikon for a long time, and you really are an extraordinarily brave and talented photographer. I know I said it before, that press photographers are a unique type of photographer, and I'll finish with what I started with in saying that your photos and content really are as wild as your hair. You're an award-winning photographer, and these images really show why. Stay safe. I hope next year is a better year for you, and that you get a chance to recover mentally and physically. Again, stay safe, wishing you all the very best, and thank you so much for sharing your images and your time with us today.